Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to get into it today?
Always.
All right, awesome. So today we're going to be talking all about building considerations, and we're going to be using this fascinating source we found that goes in depth on a concrete flat project.
Cool. Yeah, I love that this source gets into like the nitty-gritty of all these like hidden things that you never think about when you just see like a finished structure.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was thinking about it earlier, and it's like an iceberg, you know?
Yeah.
You just see the tip above the water, but underneath there's this massive structure holding it all up.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what this source does. It reveals that like hidden structure beneath the surface.
Exactly. So we're going to be your guides, taking you on a tour through all those hidden layers.
Awesome. I'm excited to dive in.
Me too. So let's start with the foundation, literally and figuratively. The source mentions a whole bunch of stuff that architects think about before they even start sketching anything out.
Yeah. They talk about things like seismic activity and wind loads and even soil type. Like, what's the deal with all that?
Right. It seems like a lot to consider for just like a flat piece of concrete.
Well, it all comes down to safety and stability.
Yeah.
Making sure the structure can withstand the forces of nature.
Okay, that makes sense. But can you give us like a real world example? Like how do those things actually translate into design choices?
Sure. So let's say you're building in California, where earthquakes are a big concern.
Right.
You're going to need different building techniques and materials than someone building in Kansas, where they're more worried about tornadoes and high winds.
Ah, so location is huge. Even for something as simple as a concrete flat.
Absolutely. And it's not just about natural disasters either. Architects think about things like sun exposure, too.
Sun exposure for a concrete flat.
Yeah, it's about energy efficiency and comfort. Think about it. Depending on where the flat is situated, it could either bake in the sun or be shaded.
I never thought about that.
Right. But architects can use that to their advantage. They can position the flat strategically or add things like overhangs or even use specific materials to control how much heat it absorbs.
Wow, so that's all baked into the design from the beginning.
Yep. And it can make a big difference in your energy bills and how comfortable the space is to use.
This is making me think about all those times I walked into a building and just felt instantly comfortable or like weirdly hot or cold.
Right. Now you're going to start noticing it everywhere. You'll be like, I bet the architect didn't think about the sun exposure here.
Totally. So much we take for granted, I guess.
Yeah. And we haven't even talked about the paperwork yet.
Oh, man. Don't remind me. The permits and regulations.
It's not the most exciting part, I know,
Hmm.
but it's super important.
Yeah, the source mentions a bunch of requirements like zoning and building codes, which seem pretty straightforward. But then there's stuff like geotechnical investigations. What even is that?
It sounds super technical, but basically it's about understanding the ground you're building on.
Okay.
They look at the soil composition and stability and any potential hazards. Like, are there underground water sources or unstable soil layers that could cause problems later on?
So it's like getting a...
Exactly. Making sure it's healthy enough to support the structure.
Wow, I'm starting to realize just how much goes into this. It's like a giant puzzle where each piece is connected.
You got it.
Yeah.
And that's why you really need to have the right people on your team. Contractors, inspectors, engineers, people who know how to put all the pieces together safely and correctly.
I bet there are some horror stories out there about people trying to DIY this stuff or skip permits.
Oh, tons.
Okay.
You might save a little money up front, but it can come back to bite you big time. We're talking fines, delays, even having to tear down parts of the structure.
Yikes. It's not worth the risk.
Not at all. So yeah, permits and paperwork might be a pain,
Mm-hmm.
but they're there for a reason to protect everyone involved, from the people building it to the people using it.
Well said. All right, so we've talked about the structural considerations and the permit maze, but we haven't even touched on the elephant in the room.
The cost breakdown.
Yeah, everyone wants to know how much this is all going to cost.
Right. And you might be surprised by how many factors contribute to the final price tag.
All right, well, let's get into it. Are you ready to crunch some numbers?
Let's do it.
All right, buckle up, folks. We're about to enter the concrete jungle of costs. Okay, so we've got the blueprints in our heads now, permits are squared away, but let's be real, everyone's thinking about the bottom line here.
Yeah, cost is a big factor. And with a project like this, a concrete flat, there's a lot that goes into the final price tag.
So let's break it down. Where do we even begin? What are the big ticket items we need to think about?
Well, first and foremost, you've got the concrete itself.
Right, obviously.
Right.
But I'm guessing it's not as simple as just calling up the concrete company and saying, hey, send me a truckload.
You got that right. The price of concrete can vary a lot depending on what type you need.
Okay, so there are different types of concrete. What makes them different, and how does that affect the cost?
There are all sorts of factors. Strength, durability, the finish you want, all that plays a role in how much you'll end up paying per cubic yard.
And for a project this size, we're talking about a lot of cubic yards,
Oh
right?
yeah, so those costs can add up quickly.
So choosing the right type of concrete is kind of a balancing act between getting the performance you need and staying within budget.
Exactly. And don't forget about delivery costs.
Oh, right. Getting that giant concrete truck to your site.
Yeah, that can be a significant expense depending on how accessible your location is. Think about it. If you're up in the hills or have a really tight backyard, it's going to cost more to get that truck where it needs to be.
Makes sense. So we've got the concrete itself, delivery, and then, of course, there's the labor to actually pour and finish it.
Definitely. You're going to need skilled workers who know what they're doing to make sure it's level and smooth and cures properly. All that expertise comes at a price.
All right, so far we've got concrete, delivery, labor. What else are we missing?
Well, we can't forget about the rebar and formwork.
Rebar, formwork. Remind me what those are again.
Sure. Think of rebar as the steel skeleton inside the concrete. It adds strength and helps prevent cracks, especially important in areas with earthquakes or heavy loads.
Right, so it's kind of like the backbone of the whole structure.
Exactly. And then formwork, that's basically the mold that shapes the concrete. It's usually made of wood or metal, and it needs to be strong enough to hold all that wet concrete in place until it hardens.
Ah, I see. So those materials add to the cost, too.
Oh yeah, for sure. The cost of rebar depends on the type and how much you need. And formwork can get pricey depending on how complex the design is and what materials they use.
Wow, it's really starting to add up.
And we haven't even factored in equipment rentals yet.
Oh, man, I was afraid you were going to say that.
You're going to need things like excavators, concrete mixers, maybe even a pump to get the concrete where it needs to go.
So basically a whole construction site worth of equipment.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And those rental fees can really add up depending on what you need and how long you need it for.
Okay, I'm starting to see why construction costs can be so intimidating. It's not just one big expense, it's a bunch of smaller expenses that snowball into a giant price tag.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's easy to overlook those hidden costs or underestimate how much they'll impact the overall budget.
So, knowing all this, what can people do to keep those costs under control?
Well, the first thing I always tell people is to get multiple bids from reputable contractors. Don't just go with the first one you find.
Shop around, compare prices. Basic good advice, right?
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask for detailed breakdowns of their estimates so you understand where your money is going.
Makes sense. Transparency is key.
Absolutely. And while you're talking to them, see if they have any suggestions for cost-saving options. Maybe there are alternative materials you could use or small tweaks to the design that can save you some money.
Oh, I bet timing could play a role too.
Yeah,
Is there a better time of year to do a project like this in terms of cost?
you're right. Construction costs often go up during peak season. So if you can, try to schedule your project during the off-season when demand is lower.
So it might be worth waiting a few months if it means saving a chunk of change.
Exactly. And, all this talk about costs and logistics makes me think about those permit requirements again.
Oh, yeah, those hyper-specific ones that vary from city to city.
Right, like needing a permit to remove a tree, even if it's on your own property.
Yeah. Why are they so important?
Well, they might seem like a pain, but they're usually there for a good reason. They're often put in place to address specific concerns or protect unique aspects of the local environment or community.
Okay, so can you give me an example? I'm having trouble wrapping my head around why something like removing a tree would need a separate permit.
Sure. Let's say you're building in an area that's known for its beautiful old trees. Trees that provide shade and help with air quality and just make the neighborhood look nice.
Okay, I can see that.
So a permit requirement for tree removal could be in place to ensure that trees are only removed when absolutely necessary, and that it's done in a way that minimizes the impact on the environment.
So it's about protecting the trees and making sure they're not just being chopped down willy-nilly.
Exactly. It's about thinking about the bigger picture,
Mm-hmm.
even if it means a little extra paperwork for the homeowner.
I get it. It's that balance between individual freedom and the collective good that we keep coming back to.
Right. Building codes, permits, even those seemingly small, hyper-specific requirements. They're all part of a larger system designed to protect us, our communities, and the environment.
It's easy to get caught up in the details and forget about the why behind it all.
For sure. But it's important to remember that those regulations, even when they seem frustrating, are usually there for good reason.
Well said. All right, so we've explored the structural side, navigated the permit maze, and dissected the cost breakdown. What else is there to uncover in this concrete jungle of ours?
Believe it or not, we haven't even touched on the aesthetic side yet. Even something as basic as a concrete flat can be designed and personalized to fit your style.
Wait, really? I thought we were just talking about a plain gray slab of concrete.
Not necessarily. There are
Hmm.
tons of options for finishes and treatments that can transform that basic slab into something unique and visually appealing.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. Tell me more about these design possibilities. What are people doing to get creative with concrete?
Oh, there's a lot we can talk about. Let's dive into the world of concrete aesthetics and see how you can add a personal touch to this seemingly mundane building material.
Welcome back. So we've covered a lot of ground here, talking about the structural stuff and the permits and the costs. But, I gotta admit, I'm kind of surprised by how much we're talking about the design aspect of this concrete flat. I always thought of concrete as being pretty utilitarian, just a plain gray slab.
Yeah, a lot of people think that. But concrete is actually really versatile. There are
Yeah.
so many ways to make it look good.
All right, well, I'm all ears. Give me some examples. What are some of the cool things people are doing with concrete these days?
Well, one popular option is stamped concrete. You basically use these big molds to create patterns and textures in the concrete.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that. You can make it look like brick or stone or even wood.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's a great way to get a high-end look without spending a fortune on those materials.
totally. So what else is there?
Another cool technique is called exposed aggregate.
Exposed aggregate? What's that?
So basically, they pour the concrete like normal, but then they use a special tool to remove the top layer of cement paste,
Okay.
and that exposes the aggregate underneath.
Mm-hmm.
The little stones and pebbles that are mixed into the concrete.
Ah, I see. So it gives it a more textured look.
Right. And it can be really beautiful, especially if you use decorative aggregates in different colors and sizes.
So you can get pretty creative with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's staining and dyeing. You can add pigments to the concrete to create all sorts of colors and effects.
It's like turning a plain canvas into a work of art.
Exactly. You can create subtle hues or bold patterns, whatever suits your style.
I'm starting to think I need to rethink my whole patio situation now.
Maybe. But before you go tearing up your backyard, let's talk a little bit more about those building codes. We've talked about how they affect cost and safety, but I'm curious how they play into the design aspect.
Yeah. Do those regulations limit what you can do creatively, or is there still room to play around within those guidelines?
It's a good question. And the answer is kind of both. Building codes are primarily concerned with safety and functionality, so they do set some boundaries.
Right. So there's certain things you just can't do.
Yeah, but skilled architects and designers can work within those limitations. They can find creative ways to incorporate aesthetics and personalize the design while still making sure everything is up to code.
So it's like a fun challenge, figuring out how to achieve your vision while still playing by the rules.
Exactly. And those rules, those building codes, they're always evolving. As new technologies emerge and we learn more about safety and sustainability, the codes get updated.
So in a way, those regulations actually push innovation. They force designers to think outside the box and come up with new solutions.
Absolutely. It's a constant back and forth between regulations and creativity, each one shaping the other.
That's really cool. It's not just about rules versus creativity. It's about finding ways for them to work together.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, it's about creating spaces that are safe, functional, and beautiful spaces that make our lives better. Whether it's a simple concrete patio or a towering skyscraper.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about concrete flats, unless you have anything else to add.
I think we've pretty much poured all our knowledge into this deep dive.
All right, then. So to wrap things up, I just want to say I've learned a ton today. I had no idea. There was so much to consider when it comes to building something as seemingly simple as a concrete flat.
Me too. It's been fun exploring all the different angles.
Absolutely. So for all you listeners out there, the next time you see a concrete structure, take a moment to appreciate all the thought and effort that went into it. From the initial design to the permits to the final finishes, it's a lot more complex than it might seem at first glance.
And who knows? Maybe this deep dive has sparked an idea for your own home improvement project. Or maybe you're even thinking about a career in architecture or construction now.
Hey, you never know. All right, that's it for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.